The current tensions between Washington and Ottawa no longer resemble traditional diplomacy. They resemble the painful end of a long partnership, and the costs are skyrocketing. For generations, the United States counted on Canada to follow its lead without question. The two nations share the planet's longest undefended border, tightly linked supply chains, and an integrated power grid. Donald Trump examined this close tie and recognized an opportunity for pressure. He believed he could force Canada into submission through heavy tariffs, insist on complete compliance, and emerge victorious. He attempted to back Canada into a corner. Prime Minister Mark Carney refused to flinch. Now the fallout is spreading rapidly. Rather than pleading for terms, Canada has carried out a huge $116 billion redirection. They are literally cutting ties in key areas. Over the next few minutes, I'll explain precisely what shifted, which side in Washington showed alarm first, and how this major geopolitical change is about to affect your household budget, your fuel costs, and the electricity running the device you're watching this on. Here's the key point to grasp. When Donald Trump returned to the White House, he relied on his go-to tool, tariffs. He imposed steep duties on Canadian products. Then he went after the most valuable asset, energy. He applied a 10% tariff on Canadian crude oil and electricity. Trump's logic was straightforward. Canada sends more than 3 million barrels of oil to the U.S. daily. They also supply large volumes of hydroelectric power to neighboring states such as New York, Michigan, and Vermont. Trump figured Canada had no escape. He assumed they lacked alternative buyers. He expected them to eat the cost, drop their prices, and essentially fund his economic plans. He miscalculated badly. Enter Mark Carney. Canada's Prime Minister isn't a television personality. He's a former central banker who built his career analyzing bond markets, steering entire economies, and navigating cutthroat financial systems. He doesn't respond to bluster. He runs the numbers. Rather than protesting Trump's energy duties, Carney reached out, but not to Washington. He contacted Tokyo. He contacted New Delhi. He contacted Berlin. And in a short time, everything flipped. Canada declared it is deliberately rerouting its energy sales away from the United States. We're discussing a $116 billion overhaul of trade patterns. Canada is moving its heavy crude toward Asian buyers via newly upgraded Pacific pipelines. They're securing extended liquid natural gas agreements with Japan and Europe. As for the affordable, clean hydroelectricity that powers lights in New York and keeps Michigan's factories operating, Canada is reserving more for its domestic industries and applying higher export fees to whatever remains. Trump sought control. Carney simply presented him with an invoice, and American consumers end up covering it. Don't just accept my perspective. Examine the real figures. Check the evidence, because the data confirms this change is genuine and gaining speed. The United States depends on Canada for more than 60% of its crude oil imports. Consider that. Not Saudi Arabia, not Mexico, Canada. Refineries across the Midwest and Gulf Coast are specifically designed to handle heavy Canadian crude. They require it to produce gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel. Trump placed a tariff on that crude. So what was Canada's response? They turned westward. The Trans Mountain pipeline expansion is now running at full capacity. It transports almost 1 million barrels daily straight to Canada's coastline. Rather than routing that oil south and facing Trump's duties, tankers are loading in Vancouver and sailing toward India and China. Sources indicate this rerouting is already creating shortages in the American Midwest. Facilities in Illinois and Ohio are rushing to adjust. When refineries face disruption, output drops. When output drops, prices at your neighborhood gas station climb. Trump aimed to penalize the provider, but the provider simply located fresh buyers. Now consider electricity. Many people overlook this, but America's electrical grid leans heavily on Canada. New York City draws about 20% of its power from Hydro-Quebec. Places like Maine, Vermont, and Minnesota count on Canadian electricity to avoid widespread outages during winter. When Trump issued threats against Canadian energy, the provinces didn't remain passive. They did the calculations. If the U.S. complicates power sales, Canada will redirect it toward its own development. They're channeling that inexpensive, dependable hydro into drawing huge AI data centers and critical mineral processing facilities to Canadian territory. For the electricity still exported south, rates are rising. Wholesale electricity prices in the Northeast are already showing increases, according to market observers. When a major winter storm strikes New England this season and strains the grid, that electricity will carry a steep price tag. This aspect has Washington genuinely worried. Carney isn't merely responding, he's constructing defenses. Over recent months, footage has shown Carney at Davos, in Tokyo, and in New Delhi. He's finalizing strategic agreements. India ranks among the world's quickest growing energy users. Canada recently designated India as a primary destination for its exports. That covers everything from liquefied natural gas to uranium and critical minerals. They're completely sidestepping the United States. The $116 billion amount isn't speculation. It represents the projected combined value of shifted energy shipments, incoming foreign investment in Canadian resource projects, and the substantial extra costs the U.S. economy will face over the coming 5 years from reduced efficiencies. Canada is demonstrating that the United States isn't the sole option anymore. This is where the emotional side of the dispute gets intriguing. Trump is losing grip on the story, caught in his own approach. Trump knows only escalation. Resistance triggers him to push harder, post more aggressively, and threaten additional duties. That strategy succeeds only when the opponent fears you. The international market no longer feels fear. It's simply tired. Observe the chain reaction unfolding. He issued tariff warnings. Energy firms then halted commitments to cross-border U.S. projects. Supply networks grew anxious. Markets factored in uncertainty. Costs increased. Ordinary American households are now bearing the burden. Trump runs the globe's biggest economy like a reality program. He craves spectacle. He craves suspense. Commodity markets ignore ratings. You can't post a barrel of oil into reality. You can't intimidate a grid into producing more power. By targeting his steadiest, most dependable supplier, Trump manufactured a needless shortage. He assured his supporters that tariffs would safeguard American employment. Instead, Michigan auto facilities face elevated expenses because Canadian aluminum carries duties, and Canadian electricity powering their lines has become a luxury item. Trump is adjusting on the fly. Reports suggest constant irritation inside the Oval Office. They anticipated Canada would cave quickly. They thought Carney would rush to Washington pleading for relief. Instead, Ottawa offers quiet. That quiet speaks volumes. Each Trump escalation prompts the world to develop alternatives discreetly. His pressure is rebounding. He's turning the U.S. economy into a weapon, but aiming it at his own people. To see why this unfolds this way, focus on the person leading Canada's government. Mark Carney doesn't confront like Donald Trump confronts. Trump thrives on disorder. Carney depends on structure. Trump employs intimidation. Carney builds partnerships. Trump seeks to impose conditions. Carney alters the equation. Carney grasps a core reality of 21st century global influence. The period of unchallenged American economic supremacy is cracking. You don't thrive by binding yourself to an erratic partner who could decide tomorrow to wreck your economy for political gain. You thrive through independence. You thrive through predictability. Carney's whole plan converts American pressure into Canadian advantage. When Trump threatens to shut the door, Carney opens multiple paths. He's pursuing a patient strategy. He recognizes Canada holds precisely what tomorrow's economy demands: critical minerals for batteries, vast freshwater supplies, enormous farming potential, and secure energy resources. By avoiding a social media battle, Carney preserves full trust among global investors. They see chaos and sudden shifts in Washington. They see steady, organized, rule-driven stability in Ottawa. Carney delivers a straightforward signal to other nations. Canada welcomes commerce, but we no longer serve as America's storage unit. We stand as an independent force. If you believe this concludes with a handful of rerouted tankers, you're missing the true magnitude. We must address the Rust Belt, because this is where Trump's risk transforms from political error into economic disaster. Donald Trump centered his identity on shielding American industry. He assured regions like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania that his duties would shield their plants. Modern production doesn't operate like a walled castle. It functions like a nervous system, and Canada forms the backbone. In the U.S. auto sector, a typical vehicle component crosses the U.S.-Canada border as many as 7 times before final assembly. Trump applied a 10% tariff across the board. He believed he was charging the Canadian state. In truth, he charged the American production chain 7-fold. Within days of the tariff reveal, the economics collapsed for U.S. car makers. You can't assemble a Ford or Chevy absent Canadian aluminum, Canadian steel, and Canadian critical minerals. Huge Midwest stamping operations depend on grids closely tied to Canadian hydro. Trump's duty raised material prices. Then it raised the energy cost to shape those materials. The impact hit immediately. Accounts indicate top auto leaders urgently contacted the White House. They weren't seeking assistance. They were cautioning about imminent job cuts. Trump believed he prioritized America. Instead, he made American vehicles less competitive worldwide. The workers who backed him faced the layoffs. While the Midwest grows anxious, examine the mood inside the Oval Office. Insiders describe a poisonous environment in Washington. Trump feels rage. He's advised by people who promised him Canada would yield fast. They saw the GDP gap and concluded Ottawa lacked power. They badly misjudged their opponent. Mark Carney doesn't lead through instinct. He headed the Bank of Canada, then the Bank of England. He knows precisely how to turn data into strength. When Trump intensified, Carney skipped TV arguments. He silently activated mechanisms Washington barely recognized. One involves critical minerals. Building EV batteries, advanced fighters, or cutting-edge chips requires rare elements. China dominated this for years. Canada possesses some of the planet's biggest undeveloped deposits. The Pentagon urgently needs Canadian supplies to reduce Chinese reliance. Trump understands, Carney understands, so Canada acted, not with an outright ban that would signal hostility. Instead, Carney's administration imposed thorough new environmental and national security assessments on all cross-border mineral shipments. It's an administrative bottleneck. American defense suppliers suddenly face delays. Approvals stall. Documents sit. Carney isn't forbidding them. He's examining them without end. It's restrained, effective payback. Trump wanted leverage. Carney quietly deprived the American defense sector of essential inputs. He achieved it courteously, backed by endless forms. But the decisive strike, the action that will reshape global alignments for generations, unfolds far north of Washington. It's in the Arctic. The United States has long contested Canada's control of the Northwest Passage. Washington labels it an international waterway. Ottawa declares it internal Canadian waters. As ice retreats, this path emerges as Earth's most promising new trade corridor. Trump consistently dismissed Canada's position. He treats the Arctic as American territory. Carney quietly secured the entry points. Recognizing Trump's withdrawal tendencies, Carney approached Europe. He approached Nordic nations. He approached Japan. He proposed preferred access rights, shared patrols, and large-scale funding for Arctic deepwater facilities. He assembled a group of countries ready to accept Canadian authority for reliable, protected passage. By the time American diplomats caught on, agreements were sealed. Trump now finds himself excluded from the largest shipping transformation since the Panama Canal. If U.S. vessels seek Northwest Passage use, they'll follow Canadian guidelines, pay Canadian fees, and recognize Canadian jurisdiction. Trump tried to trap Canada. Carney redrew the global map, omitting the United States. This illustrates a true geopolitical transformation. It arrives not through weapons or conflict, but via trade routes, electrical networks, and financial systems. The effects reach you at home, regardless of location or interest in Canadian affairs. Canada influences your grocery prices. It affects home building materials. It impacts vehicle fuel and home cooling power. For 8 decades, the world order rested on expected American guidance. The U.S. stood as the essential country. Wealth required selling to America. Safety required partnering with America. But Trump's forceful go-it-alone trade conflicts erode that confidence. If the United States targets Canada, its nearest neighbor, most intertwined ally, a partner in defense and principles, then every nation faces potential American pressure. The world notices. This 116 billion energy redirection goes beyond oil and power. It sends a message. It shows the American market isn't required. If Canada can separate its vital economic drivers from the United States and prosper, others will imitate. Japan, South Korea, the EU, they observe Mark Carney. They see a mid-sized nation effectively counter a superpower using worldwide markets. The larger meaning, Donald Trump's America First approach is swiftly becoming America isolated. Carney never shouted. He simply increased the penalty for overlooking Canada. So what's next? How does this confrontation resolve? Three plausible near-term paths emerge. Scenario A seems most probable. Gradual erosion. Trump won't retreat from tariffs due to pride. Carney steadily secures agreements with Asia and Europe. The U.S. economy endures a drawn-out rise in energy expenses. Inflation creeps higher in the Midwest and Northeast. Everyday Americans cover the cost of political posturing, while Canada fully diversifies its trade, reshaping the North American bond permanently. Scenario B involves further intensification. Normally, leaders de-escalate here. Trump avoids de-escalation. If U.S. fuel prices surge excessively, Trump could strike back, perhaps restricting Canadian access to U.S. finance or weaponizing border controls to halt trucking. That scenario risks more than trade friction. It threatens widespread regional economic collapse. Chains would halt. Stores could empty quickly. Scenario C brings surprise reversal. U.S. businesses finally push back. Energy groups, car producers, and tech firms powering AI centers confront the White House, insisting the chaos stop. Under heavy domestic strain and falling markets, Trump quietly issues an order retracting energy tariffs, framing it as a hidden triumph while yielding to Carney's position. Mark Carney didn't merely overcome a duty. He shattered the myth of American untouchability. The world watches closely. If Canada can resist the United States successfully, Washington's ability to dictate global trade terms has ended. The 116 billion energy redirection marked only the start. The worldwide rebalancing has arrived, sparked by Donald Trump. Do you believe the U.S. economy can withstand this degree of separation, or has Mark Carney irreversibly undermined Trump's position? Share your thoughts in the comments. This situation continues unfolding privately, and we'll keep following the financial trail. Subscribe, enable alerts, and don't accept mainstream claims that it's merely a trade disagreement. It's a fundamental change. See you next time.